So hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Lucy and today I'm filming a video I've been meaning to film for, probably not gonna lie, like 3 years. So I'm finally getting my butt in gear and talking about my top historical fiction recommendations. I'm a huge history fan. I love historical fiction. I think historical fiction and fantasy are the books that I read the most. So I don't claim to be an expert in this field, not at all, and I do kind of like a certain type of historical fiction, which I'm going to explain to you today. Like most of the time, I enjoy historical fiction with a romantic kind of element to it, and I do like historical fiction based around women. I'm not going to be reading the swords and sandals types of historical fiction where there's lots of fighting, lots of action, even though I love those things. So these are just my personal preferences. And if you like stories with incredible characterization, lots of historical facts, and also a good romance at the heart of it, then I think you'll love all of these suggestions. Now, historical fiction to me is a way of pure escapism. I find that no other genre really just completely takes me away from this world, rather like fantasy does actually. So that's probably why I love historical fiction so much. And what I like in particular is learning and being completely immersed in a new world that, you know, I wouldn't have known much about. It is because of some of these novels that I've now kind of taken up the helm and really started researching more about this particular era or particular like person in history. I'm going to give you some recommendations. If you're new to historical fiction, these are what I think you should start with. So let's kick this off with the queen of historical fiction, that is Philippa Gregory. So Philippa Gregory was probably my first introduction to proper historical fiction. And what I mean by that is that I'd never kind of read a adult series before that kind of looked at a certain historical time period or certain historical events. And Philippa Gregory is best known for her novel The Other Boleyn Girl, which looks at Anne Boleyn and kind of the court of Henry VIII. It was made into a really successful film. But my favourite series of hers is called the Wallflower Series, which is based around the Plantagenet period of history. So Philippa Gregory's Wallflower Series starts off with, I believe, The Lady of the Rivers. I think that's the first book chronologically. And that is kind of centred around the court of Henry VI, I believe. And the Wallflower Series is based on women. So these are all the women in history at that time period, so it takes each of the kind of monarchs in turn. So it starts with when Henry VI was in power, but then the next book in the series, The White Queen, which is the first book I read from Philippa Gregory and fell in love with, is based on the character of Elizabeth Woodville, who married Edward IV and became Queen of England that way. And the kind of like crux to that novel is that she was essentially a nobody. She wasn't exactly a commoner, but she wasn't anyone of aristocratic birth, and she managed to bewitch Edward IV and they fell in love, and it's kind of one of those historical romances that are, you know, is kind of famous. And what I really love most about this series is that it just completely focuses on the women. These women were crucial to the politics at the time. Of course, during that time, women were kind of seen as a means of bartering and power play. But what Philippa Gregory does in this Wallflower series is really show you that it was the women who really played the game. They held their own in a lot of ways where they could. But what these books really do suggest is that the women had a crucial part to play, and they completely changed the course of history, essentially. My favourite book in the series, there are quite a few of them which are my favourites. So obviously The White Queen, based on Elizabeth Woodville, was one of my favourites. I also adored The Kingmakers Daughter. Now this is based around Anne Neville. So her father was the Earl of Warwick, and he was called the Kingmaker because he essentially was the person who got Edward IV onto the throne. And he really was a very powerful man. This is about his daughter, who goes on to become Queen of England herself when she marries Richard III. And I am a big kind of Richard III fan, and so this novel in particular was my favourite because it just shows you kind of a glimpse into the life of Anne Neville, a woman who is not really documented very much in history. And what I think this novel does a really good job of is giving her a voice. And finally, my other favourite novel in the Wallflower series by Philippa Gregory is The White Princess, which is about Elizabeth of York, who marries Henry VII. I might be boring you with a mini history lesson here, but I'm trying to urge you all to pick up a Philippa Gregory novel because they are just pure escapism, but they're also very well researched. A lot of people have issues with kind of Philippa Gregory's allusions to things, but the thing about history is you've got to fill in the gaps somewhere. So this is her take on history, and it's not necessarily the whole truth. because we'll never find that out. But I think she does a really good job of filling in the gaps and bringing these women to life. So from Plantagenet, England to 17th century Amsterdam. This is The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. This is a historical kind of mystery, and it is one of the most beautiful novels I've read in a while. There's also been a recent BBC series on this novel because they've brought it to life really, really beautifully. So if you aren't going to read the novel, I would suggest checking out the BBC show because it's really something special. So The Miniaturist centres around a character called Nella, and she has recently been married to a merchant called Johannes, and she's sent from her kind of home, which is out in the countryside somewhere, to Amsterdam where Johannes lives with his sister. On arriving there, she realises this is not the kind of life that she wanted to live. She is quite surprised at the kind of brutal reality of Amsterdam, about the house that she's now living in, and also kind of the coldness that exudes from Johannes and his sister. And on getting to the house, as a wedding present, Johannes buys her a kind of miniature doll's house, and he gives her an address of where she can kind of buy little miniaturist dolls and, you know, furniture to fill the doll's house. And so she approaches a miniaturist and orders kind of some bits for the doll's house, and then certain events unfold where the miniature figurines kind of start reflecting life, and there's a big secret revealed about her husband. There is kind of intrigue and drama, and it's almost claustrophobic how 17th century Amsterdam actually is like. You can taste it, you can smell it, you can feel it. And Nella is put under a lot of pressure to kind of save her family from exposure and drama, and yes, a lot of things happen in this novel. It is unlike anything I've read before. I've not read a lot of novels about, you know, 17th century Amsterdam, and this, I think, does a really good job of just capturing the essence of it. It's also a mystery, and there is kind of a supernatural element to it. I'm not going to say any more about this except read it. I think if you want a kind of historical mystery that is shocking but also eerie, this is the perfect book for you. Okay, so next up is something rather different. We are going back in time to 1400s Brittany, and this is a YA series by Robin Lefevre's called His Fair Assassin, and this is book 3 that I'm holding up, called Mortal Heart, but the first book is called Grave Mercy. This series completely blew me away when I read it. I've not yet read the third book, but now I'm holding it up, I'm kind of like, damn, I need to read this soon, because the first and second book were incredible. So this is centered around a group of assassin nuns. Sounds bizarre, but let me tell you, it is incredible. And each book is focused on one of the assassins in the kind of convent, and it's just breathtaking, the level of detail. I must say, I didn't know a lot about 1400s Brittany, but now I feel a little bit more knowledgeable. And I guess this is kind of a fantasy historical fiction crossover, because there is kind of like fantasy elements to this, because they're assassin nuns, and there's kind of like supernatural-esque things that happen in this book series as well, but it's also centered around that real historical time period, and you can tell that Robin Lefevre has really done her research. It's also got that YA readability, and there's brilliant romance in the series as well. So it really is a brilliant example of YA historical fiction done well. And finally, continuing the romance theme to this historical fiction recommendations list, I have to talk about Lisa Kleypas. I'm sorry, I've been talking about her in like every single video I make, but I'm really addicted to her, and it's an actual issue. So Lisa Kleypas is a historical romance author, and what I think is important to know is that yes, there is traditional kind of steamy romance in this. They are like romances, but what's important to note is that there is also incredible levels of historical detail and accuracy. In the latest novel that she's written, it goes really into depth about the Fenians in Victorian London, which are kind of the Irish rebel group, and it was all kind of based around home rule in Ireland. And there's a really good balance of historical fact and also kind of that romance plot and historical fiction, I guess. So the books that I would recommend you start with if you're interested in the series would be to start with the Wallflower series first, which kind of sets you off quite lightly. The first book, which is called Secrets of a Summer Night, isn't very rich in historical detail at all, but it kind of introduces you to Victorian society and these women who are out in society, but they're also very kind of shy, and they don't have a lot of fortune finding husbands, and that that is kind of their main goal. It brings this group of girls together, and each book in the series takes on one of the girls individually and looks at how they kind of find their love of their lives, I guess. It sounds really silly and cliche, but there's something brilliant about Lisa Kleypas's writing which makes every single novel she writes unique and rich in detail. So once you're finished the Wallflower series, I'd recommend that you read the Ravenel series, which is based on this family called the Ravenels, and it takes each of them in turn and kind of gives them their happy ever after, I guess. Now, what's quite different in this series, the Ravenel series, is that historical fiction and kind of historical nuance is kind of really woven in. And you kind of get a sense of what Victorian agriculture looked like, what kind of running a Victorian household looks like. You kind of know a bit more about what London looked like at that time, what the medical profession was like at that time. And I think it would be a shame to just classify Lisa Kleypas as just a romance writer. She is so much more than that. This is historical fiction at its best, and I really would recommend it. The romance is just an added bonus, and it is pretty steamy, so if you're not prepared for that, then that's okay. But every book so far has been incredible. So guys, that is it for my current historical fiction recommendations. Thank you for watching, and if you have any recommendations for me, please do leave them down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe for more videos over the coming weeks, and I'll see you soon. Bye guys.